I believe that what we are struggling with predominantly in Ireland and across Western nations is the sophistication of our thinking. And it doesn't have to be building rocket ships or anything like that, but just our ability to hold an idea while also understanding and being able to argue for the counter idea to that. And then on and on and on, right? So, uh, primary idea and then a combative one, one that's counter to it. Our ability to move between two of those, and then if a third position pops up, being able to argue for and against that as well, right? And I believe that number one, that should be the primary influence or the primary domain of parents with children and grandparents with children as well, right? Because look, we're human beings, we'll all have our biases and stuff, and that's why it's important for children to be able to interact with not just their parents but also their extended family, right? Because and grandparents are essential for this because they obviously have longer lives, they've lived longer, so you would naturally attribute a bit of wisdom and a bit of experience and lessons learned along the way and humility and all that sort of stuff, right? With older people, right? So they'd be able to steer children in a, not even steer, right? They'd be able to bring more out of the child just by interaction with an older person, because they'll be hearing, they'll be feeling, they'll experience that an older person, a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt has, right? And the more information and experience that the child can take on and relate to and interact with, the more expanded their self sense, their self esteem might be, right? And the wider and deeper their understanding of the world and people and of themselves would be, right? That'd be the hope, right? But we've suffered in Ireland as a result of not having that, right? So after the parents, then you would look to the schooling system, and you would look to, over the last couple of decades anyway, what has become more normal and more achievable for people, more available to people, is third level education, which for myself as a child, I always thought it was something marvelous, right? The idea of college and the idea of a university and the idea of professors and lecturers and going learning about things you're interested in, right? Where you pick a degree that is nearly super specific to your area of interest and you become a master in it, maybe, right? Or you become someone who is very capable of communicating a certain perspective or demonstrating a certain skill or understanding a field of knowledge to some degree, right? To a degree. You get a degree because your understanding is deeper and wider, and hopefully the idea being that you're better equipped than the average person to converse with certain topics because you understand them at a level that is probably not available or probably not well understood or held by people who didn't study in that area, right? Simple common sense stuff, right? But I feel like there's been a failing in that end. It depends on how far you want to go back. Like some might attribute it to the building of um, the Catholic universities, which is sponsored by the English Crown, incidentally, right? You might attribute it to just the last couple of decades where things have kind of slipped favorably in one way to the detriment of of the alternative perspective, right? Whichever way you slice it, it is obvious to people who have gone through the third level system, and depending as well on which area of third level you were in, which department you were studying in, right? So like you could have been in engineering, in which case the room for injecting political discourse is much narrower than if you went to the humanities, right, where it's kind of layered upon it, right? So everything is nearly read through a specific lens, and you can see that in the output that they have, right? So judge it by its results, and third level colleges tend to overproduce or over churn out people who are not just left leaning, but nearly to an extreme degree, right? They are communists in their outlook, in their worldview. They are reductionists. They are social constructivists, right? To varying degrees, right? So they don't believe. that there is such thing as an objective morality. They don't believe that they believe that a lot of things can be reduced or can't be reduced down to a specific thing. Therefore, they throw away and deny the reality of the concept, right? So they deny that the concept is even useful in any way, right? They're dealing with language, all that sort of stuff. So they argue language and very rarely reality, right? So they come out very, very, no, I won't say pushed, but they come out very aligned to a particular philosophy, a particular worldview, and a particular political perspective, right? And what I'm going to do here is just look at some of what Donald Trump has to say about that. Obviously, yes, he's speaking in an American context, but I hope people are attuned to the idea now that the issues that America are facing are very, very similar to the issues Ireland are facing and to England are facing, and on the whole way, nearly across the Western nation or the Western civilization, right? And I'm going to break it up into parts because otherwise he could be here for hours. But I want you to focus on not Donald Trump himself, okay, but the ideas. Because I started by saying that I think what we're lacking is perspective in this age. And the remedy to that is hearing different ideas, right? So I don't want people to reject these ideas offhand. I want you to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, have I ever really spoken to myself or with myself or thought about these things deeply? Can I explain the argument for and against these ideas, right? In a fair way, right? Without just going, that's all nonsense or whatever. Can you actually engage in self-debate, right? And essentially what that leads to is, can you develop yourself? Or do you need someone to just give you a default worldview and then you just work according to that? Can you develop yourself by arguing with yourself in a adaptive way, right? And in a healthy way. And in a friendly way too, right? So you're self-learning. So we listen to what he says.
Recent weeks, Americans have been horrified to see students and faculty at Harvard and other once respected universities expressing support for the savages and jihadists who attacked Israel. We spend more money on higher education than any other country, and yet they're turning our students into communists.
So, again, the labels are interesting or useful because you can kind of categorize people in this or that group, right? Useful to a degree. But I suppose the really interesting part of it, or I suppose the really important part of the conversation here, is not whether third level institutions are creating whatever, an extreme on the left or an extreme on the right or an extreme in any direction, right? The problem is, as best as I can see it anyway, or at least according to myself, is that we do have third level institutions that are churning out people who tend to lean toward an extreme, regardless of what that is, right? They don't seem to be well versed in the counter arguments to their positions, because otherwise, like, there's valid arguments across any plethora of worldviews, right? And it's important to be able to work your way around all of these and to understand them and not just shoot them down instantly, right? But you're not seeing that kind of sophisticated thinking or basic common sense thinking, even, I would say, right? From people who tend to come from, again, different departments in universities and colleges. But the preponderance of evidence would suggest that students tend to lean more left when they come out, right? And that's an issue, right? That's an issue. Education should be not trying to push someone in a certain way, right? Because that's just manipulation, right? And it's abuse too, because you would step into an education system. There's a hierarchy there, right? So you start out degree, master's, postgrad, PhD, whatever. So there's a hierarchy there, and that's fine, okay? But when you have a hierarchy, especially in education, you would want to assume and believe, and you would want to be able to test and verify that people who abode on certain steps of that hierarchy would have a sufficient ability and a qualification, not just in terms of paper, but in terms of ability to think. They would have a qualification that is sufficient to give them such a position of authority or a position of prestige in these education systems, right? That should be the least of what you expect. But that's not what you're getting. You're not getting a neutral, or as neutral as can be. You're not getting a dispassionate sharing of ideas, right? And allowing the students to come to their own conclusions around these things, right? And that's not helpful, okay? It's not helpful either way. You want to create a system where people are allowed to interact with ideas, to gain a good understanding of these ideas, a multitude of ideas, right? And let them decide then. Don't like I suppose a freer marketplace of ideas where people can go pick it up, try it on, have a look at it, and then also be privy to what the counter argument to that worldview is, right? And we're not seeing that. Trump is saying it for America, but it's the same with Ireland, right? The educational system is very flawed, right? And it doesn't mean throw the baby out with the bathwater. It just means let's have a look at it, let's evaluate it, let's assess different lectures and stuff on how neutral they are or how biased they are. And it's fine if they're biased, right? But if you're going to be biased to one perspective, you should, and again, I'm just repeating myself now, but you should be able to share the counter to that with your students and have them argue with you, right? Pick it apart, have a debate. That's what it's for, like opening minds, right? Cracking open concretized worldviews where you can only see things through one perspective. It's not helpful, right? It's not helpful, and it's essentially doing intellectual damage to people, right? Not just the results that come from being a fanatic in one way or another, right? Good or bad, right? So that's just one part of this, and I'm going to use this video because it's good to highlight points, right? And again, as I said, I'm not going to go through the whole thing now because I could be here for hours with it, but it's a really interesting video for the sake of bringing ideas into the conversation, right? So regardless of what your views of the person that's speaking it are, you can have them all you want, but at least be honest enough to entertain the ideas and the conversations that can come from what he's going to be saying here, right?